I got asked the question the other week when I was talking about my spring bulbs, and it was this. Can you explain what a bulb lasagna is? Because it's really confusing. I have to be honest, I've never considered it to be a confusing thing, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of understanding where that's coming from, and it is this. We do bulb lasagnas an awful lot if we grow spring bulbs, but we've never had to explain it or put it into terms for other people before. And when you start doing that, it can sound a bit complicated. So I'm going to try and super simplify this down for you guys, just in time to get your spring bulbs planted. So I'm going to do one for you in this pot, but I'm going to tell you more about it because it's not just about growing in pots. So let's do it. Bulb lasagnas. Okay, I'm ready to go. Right. Lasagna bulb planting is just about layers, okay? And I think that's where people get a bit confused about how many layers, what plants do I put on what layer, how do I decide, all of that stuff. So let's do this super simple. I'm going to explain to you the concept of the lasagna thing, and it's way simpler than you think. I'm going to talk to you about how you choose what goes where, the depth, that kind of thing. And in that, we're going to talk about the little bits that you kind of need to keep in your head, okay? So here's the first thing. I'm going to draw on a bit of paper first, because I think this will actually make it much more obvious for you. So rather than me going to plant it up straight away, because you don't get a proper view, I'm going to do it on paper. So watch this. So we need a fake pot, okay? So if I say this is, I'll just throw a pen away. So if I say this is the pot that I'm using, okay, let me bring you in so you can see. We've got a fake pot, okay, and I've got some bulbs to demonstrate with you. First things first then, you get a layer of soil at the bottom of your pot because the first layer of bulbs need that soil to be sitting in for the roots to go in, all of the usual stuff. So get a wee layer of soil in there, and that's what I've done to get started. Now you'll have lots of different types of bulbs, I imagine, the same as us. But the first thing you're going to notice is apart from looking kind of different, you'll see they're different sizes, okay? So these tulips, you can see, is quite a large bulb compared to these little guys, okay? These are crocuses. These are daffodils. They're kind of similar to the tulips, slightly smaller, okay? And this is your trick. You're looking for different sizes first of all, because the easiest way to think about planting your spring bulbs is go about 3 times the depth of the bulb. So if I move these out the way, put them in the right bag. So these are tulips. If I plant these 3 times the depth of a bulb, so 3 times the size, okay? And if we see that's the top of the pot. So that's going to be my first layer then, okay? Let me do this with the crocuses to show you. So these are obviously much smaller, so 3 times for a crocus. You can see, if we start with the soil level the same, it takes you to above the tulips. So there you go. So there's your layer for the tulips. And this is just rough to show you. There you go. And there's your layer for the crocuses. Obviously, I'm going to put a lot more than that in there. And then it leaves this space. As you can guess, I've chosen daffodils for that because they are slightly smaller. And you'll see if I go with 3 bulbs for my daffodils, oh look, works out perfect. So daffodils go in that layer. So that is a very, very simplistic approach to how the lasagna bulb planting works. It's about layers. Lasagna is layers of pasta and sauce and filling. Your lasagna for your bulbs is the same thing. It's different layers of bulbs. Okay, so that's your first thing. How deep you plant them and what layers they go in, it's about their size. So the biggest ones are at the bottom because they'll be the deepest planted. Okay, now the thing is, you don't have to worry about this because the bulbs will all grow through each other. They'll find their way. So don't worry about this too much. Okay, but that's the essentials. The next thing then, how would you decide what you're going to plant? I have my iPad to show you this. Okay, your decisions usually are going to be based on 2 things. Number 1, you're going to choose bulbs that are going to give you the flowers you want to see. So you may decide on a theme and have specific colours. For instance, this pot I'm doing is going to be kind of yellows and blues, or yellows and purpley blues in this pot. So everything I've chosen to go in it is going to be those colours. You're also probably going to think about what time those plants will flower. Because the brilliant thing about it, the whole purpose of doing lasagna planting for your bulbs is so that you can keep getting colour and flowers for as long a period as possible. So that pot is never sitting empty and sad looking. There will always be new flowers coming up. So that's your 2 things. So let me show you them. The 3 bulbs that I've chosen for this pot. My first one, let's look at my tulips. So I've got lily flowering mixed tulips in this one, okay? So colour wise, as I mentioned, I'm going for these kind of purpley blues and yellows, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is these will flower in April. So these will be the last things to flower in my pot. Rip Van Winkle is my daffodils I've chosen. These are yellow, okay? These are going to flower in March. So when these are flowering and pretty much they'll be ready to pass, bang, it's April and my tulips will be taking over. So that way I won't lose out when these guys go, okay? Now, the other one I'm taking, oh, I never showed you. Rip Van Winkle is a smaller daffodil. You can see a little spiky one I'm really looking forward to. Now, my crocuses then. This is another botanical mix of crocuses. So again, it's blues and yellows because this is the theme I'm going for. But these will start to flower in February. Crocuses are some of the first things to come up in our garden. So using this lasagna planting method, I can have colour in February, March and April from these 3 different bulbs. So let's go. Okay, so I've already said then, tulips are going to be the ones that will go at the bottom. So very, very roughly then, we're planting these about 3 times their own depth. I've already got this pot ready to go, so I'm just going to get these in here. Now, you always, spring bulbs, pointy side up, the kind of flat side goes to the bottom. The pointy side is where those shoots are going to come from. The flat end is where all the roots are going to come from. So I'm starting off. Again, this will be very much to your way of doing things. I'm giving the bulbs a little bit of space between themselves. Not heaps. I usually start off, I go round the outside and then a couple in the centre. I don't want the bulbs touching each other so that if any of them rot or there's anything wrong with them, they're not touching so it won't spread as easily. But I just want to make sure I've got nice even spacing. And then I'm going to cover that with a layer of soil. And again, remembering if these are going to be 3 times that deep, so you're thinking about how much soil you're adding on the top. Tulips are in there. Now, just quickly, the mix that I've added in here, this is my own homemade potting mix. This one I've made specifically for my spring bulbs for 2 reasons. There's an awful lot going on in this pot, so there needs to be a lot of nutrition for these little bulbs because there's going to be a lot of plants needing that food. But secondly, bulbs don't like to be sitting in the wet. So this is a really free draining mix I've made. There's a lot of fibrous matter in there with that compost to make sure that it drains really well and it doesn't sit wet. That's all. Okay, next. Next then is my daffodils. So we're just going to get these in here too. And I'll probably do the same sort of idea. I'll just do a rough circle and then fill it in. Now you can see that I'm deliberately not panicking about any of this. I'm not being overly complicated about it. I do know some other gardeners who actually mark where every single bulb is, so that they never have bulbs overlapping. Yeah, you could do that. It's absolutely not essential. The bulbs will find their way. They'll move through the soil and find their way, so it's not essential. There we go. Make sure I've got them all nice and even. And another layer of soil. There we go. So that's tulips and daffodils. My very last one is my crocuses. They're much, much smaller. So these are the ones that are on the top of the layer, and I'll be able to put lots of these in here. Now with crocuses, and again, this is a personal thing. Look at this, you can see they've started to sprout. They're desperate to get going. You'll notice I'm not doing the circle, the neat circle. This is a personal thing. I actually think crocuses look better when they're just kind of little masses of colour, and it just looks much more natural. So I'm just roughly kind of putting these in random little groups. With crocuses, the more the better. And same as before, get that covered in soil. There we go. How simple is it, really? You're just planting up your pot with those layers of the bulbs. That's all it is. This can now go out into my garden and it will sit there and do its thing until it's time for all of those little guys to get their little shoots out above the surface. Okay, so you regular guys know this then, as I will put a layer of grit on top of this soil. The reason being, there's kind of 2 things. Number 1, It's a mulch. It's a decorative mulch, I get. So it's not organic, but it does the same job. So it's a cover on there to try and help ward off things like the wind chill and the wind drying the pot out and things. But more importantly than that, for us, it's to stop all the little animals around here digging in here and stealing my bulbs. Because you will find with spring bulbs, the mice love to eat them, the squirrels love to eat them, all sorts. So it's just a layer to try and protect them from anything digging, stealing them and eating them. That's what. So that's the last thing I'll do. But that is lasagna bulb planting, and I've done it in a pot. It is exactly the same concept when you do this out in the garden. You don't have to do it in a pot. And naturally, a lot of us do it without thinking. So in my beds and my big raised planters, I will have all sorts of bulbs in there at all different depths to give me lots of colour for as long as possible. You just don't give it a fancy title like lasagna bulb planting when you're doing it out in the garden. We kind of think of that when it comes to the pots. But I hope that was a super, super simple explanation. So it's about the biggest bulbs go to the bottom. When you choose your bulbs, think about your colours and what colours you want to see, what types of flowers you want, and think about when they're going to flower to make sure you've got a display in that pot or area of your garden for as long as possible. That's it. Okay. So now we're all excited about spring, aren't we? We're desperate to see those bulbs come up. Okay, so we're not going to see these ones until spring coming, but grab a cup of tea. Here are some of my spring garden tours from previous years, so you can see what the bulbs look like when they come up in previous years. See you, folks.